Welcome to The Economist in Your Ear podcast. Here's a thought-provoking question for you. In the frantic, almost breathless race to make car dashboards look exactly like futuristic, massive smartphones, have we inadvertently introduced a greater safety risk than, say, driving impaired? We are talking about the basic act of adjusting the fan speed.
That sounds quite aggressive, but it really hits the core tension in modern vehicle design, doesn't it? It sort of kicked off with cars like the Tesla Model S, popularizing this minimalist cabin idea, huge central screen controlling pretty much everything, climate, navigation, media, and crucially, certain safety settings like lane assist or adaptive cruise defaults.
Right. And the practical outcome of this, the thing that's clearly got regulators worried, is that this shift basically ripped crucial, frequently used functions out of the realm of dedicated physical controls.
Yeah.
Where we rely on muscle memory, haptics, feeling the button click. It dumped them all into pixelated menus. For decades, you could adjust the volume or the temperature without taking your eyes off the road for more than a split second. Now, it often requires a series of, calculated taps, looking down, finding the icon.
Exactly. And critics have, I think correctly, labeled this a dangerous distraction built right into the dashboard itself. We aren't interested in just taking a nostalgic swipe at technology today, though. What we want to do is unpack the hard evidence and the crucial nuances that show why major safety organizations are now forcing car makers to seriously, hit reverse on this whole trend.
Okay, let's start with that hard evidence then. We need to quantify the cost, right? The cost of replacing a simple button with a screen interaction. And the data is, frankly, pretty stunning.
Yeah, it really is. I think the defining data point came from V. Biligare. That's the highly respected Swedish motoring magazine. Back in 2022, they did a structured road test. They timed drivers trying to complete a common task bundle, changing radio stations, adjusting temperature, resetting the trip meter all while driving at highway speeds, 110 kilometers per hour.
Okay, so real-world conditions. And they used an old-school button car as the control, I assume.
Exactly. And the results were immediate and sharp. That driver, relying on instinct, muscle memory, the tactile feel of the knobs, they finished the entire bundle in approximately 10 seconds.
10 seconds, okay. Which means they traveled only about 300 meters while their attention was, momentarily divided. Seems reasonable.
Right. Now compare that to the modern minimalist cars in the test. The worst performer, it was the MG Marvel R, took a staggering 45 seconds to complete those exact same tasks.
45 seconds.
45 seconds. Which means the driver traveled 1.4 kilometers. That's nearly a mile, with their eyes and attention constantly cycling between the screen and the road. When you map that against the 10 seconds for the old control car, it's not just a marginal difference. It's a design failure, really, that results in a 35-second increase in vulnerability. Huge!
That scale of difference is genuinely shocking. But let's zoom in a bit on why that failure happens. It comes down to eyes-off road time, doesn't it? Which is exactly what researchers like Norway's big research foundation, SINTEF, have been quantifying.
Precisely. Their 2024 eye tracking study showed how the cost of distraction adds up almost instantly, even for the simplest, quickest interaction, like, say, changing the temperature on a touchscreen. The driver spent an average of 3.5 seconds with their eyes completely off the road.
3.5 seconds. It might not sound like a lifetime, but at highway speed, you are covering the length of a football field completely blind, essentially.
Exactly. And it gets exponentially worse with complexity. Finding a new radio station, one that wasn't already a favorite, that cost the driver 11 seconds of attention. Trying to input a new sat-nav address, 16 seconds. You are navigating the world functionally blind for several critical moments. It's quite scary when you think about it.
Okay, 16 seconds is a long time to not be looking at the road.
It is. And this leads us to what I think is maybe the most provocative finding from the UK's Transport Research Laboratory, TRL. They're kind of the gold standard for simulator safety work. Their 2020 study compared drivers using modern car systems with drivers who were, chemically impaired.
Wait, hang on. You're telling me that fiddling with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto is comparable to or potentially worse than driving impaired? That really challenges a fundamental assumption about driving safety.
It does, but TRL's protocols showed exactly that. Actively interacting with these complex in-car systems impaired driver reaction time more than driving over the legal alcohol limit, and even more than using cannabis under their specific testing conditions. Now, it's a specific comparison, but it absolutely hammers home the seriousness of this visual and cognitive distraction. You might be perfectly sober, fully attentive, but the car's interface itself is forcing your driving performance down to an impaired level.
Wow. It's hard to ignore that kind of data, a nearly 400% increase in distraction time just to adjust the fan speed, potentially worse reactions than being over the limit. I suppose when the data becomes this dramatic, regulators are basically forced to step in and, apply the brakes, right?
They are, absolutely. And Europe, as often happens in car safety, is leading the charge here. Euro NCAP, which is Europe's main, highly influential safety rating organization, is drawing a line in the sand. Starting in January 2026, they will actually withhold the full 5-star safety rating unless a vehicle has dedicated physical controls for certain crucial functions.
That's a huge market lever, isn't it? Even though the Euro NCAP rating doesn't have direct legal force, manufacturers spend millions advertising that 5-star badge. It's almost a non-negotiable consumer expectation these days. So, what made the regulatory red list? What functions absolutely must be physical now?
It's the real essentials, the things you need instantly, often in an emergency or when the weather suddenly changes. So wipers, indicators, hazard lights, defrost functionality, basic volume or mute control, and headlight modes, things like that.
Makes sense. If you hit dense fog or sudden heavy rain, you absolutely shouldn't have to navigate 2 menus just to turn on the wipers.
No, you need to be able to feel for the switch instantly, without thinking, without looking.
And we've already started seeing the market respond, haven't we? Manufacturers are openly citing driver dislike and safety concerns, and probably the Euro NCAP threat, as reasons for backtracking.
Definitely. Companies like VW, for instance, have publicly committed to restoring physical buttons on their steering wheels and dashboards. They got a lot of flack for their touch-sensitive sliders. And Hyundai, Porsche, others are following suit. They're acknowledging that in the pursuit of sleek aesthetics, that kind of minimalist look, they fundamentally compromise the user experience and, critically, safety.
Yeah, I think the most important part of this discussion, though, is maybe the critical interpretation bit. We have to move past the simple, catchy slogan of screens bad, knobs good. Because that frames the issue maybe a bit too simply. It misses some technical nuance, surely.
It does, yeah. What's critical here is recognizing that the mandate isn't really about banning pixels altogether. The core principle, which organizations like NHTSA in the US have recognized for decades, is minimizing eyes-off road time. I mean, a poorly placed physical button can be just as distracting as a screen if you have to hunt for it, right? The core issue is design execution, not necessarily the technology platform itself.
Okay, so the difference between a safe screen interface and a dangerous one often comes down to things like accessibility and hierarchy. How easy is it to get to what you need?
Exactly. The worst offenders are those that bury basics like climate control, fan speed, or maybe heated seats, 3 layers deep into complex menus with tiny fonts. You're squinting, you're tapping multiple times. Better, safer designs keep it special. Frequently used functions like defrost or basic climate settings on a permanent static bar, maybe at the bottom of the screen. Or they duplicate critical actions right onto physical steering wheel controls. If an action can genuinely be completed with a single quick glance, the risk drops dramatically.
But I have to ask, if the solution is just good human factors design, which is basically the science of designing systems for human limitations, why did almost every major automaker seem to abandon these clear principles in the first place? Was it purely cost-saving, or was it more about chasing that perceived luxury, that tech-forward image?
I think it was probably a blend of both. A large blank screen looks futuristic, no doubt about it, and it allows automakers to change the car's feature set dynamically via software updates, which is cheaper than retooling physical dashboards. Designing and installing physical, high-quality, tactile buttons and knobs is surprisingly expensive. It requires much more complex dashboard architecture, wiring. The screen offered a kind of low-cost, high-aesthetic shortcut to minimalism.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's tackle the supposed workaround. Voice control. Manufacturers are really championing this now, aren't they? Arguing that if you just tell the car what to do, you never have to look down. Problem solved.
Well, voice control is far from a silver bullet. And this brings us back to that crucial concept of cognitive load. That's the mental bandwidth required to process, remember, and correctly phrase a command. While it might eliminate the visual distraction, sure, your eyes stay on the road, it often substitutes it with significant cognitive distraction. You're thinking hard about what to say.
Okay. So you are mentally taxed, trying to remember the exact command or the system's required phraseology, even if your hands and eyes are technically free.
Precisely. And think about it. If the digital assistant mishears you, which happens, or if the system requires a really rigid, specific command structure, you are often immediately forced to look back at the screen anyway, just to confirm the action or correct the error. At that moment, you've actually added both a high cognitive load and visual distraction. Kind of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a good point. We also have to layer this whole discussion over the growing issue of automation, don't we? When a car handles some of the driving itself, there's this fascinating and slightly worrying behavioral change, sometimes called the automation risk multiplier.
Yes, this is a critical compounding factor. Studies consistently show that when drivers use partial automation, systems that handle steering and speed control for periods, they can develop a false sense of security. And statistically, they become far more likely to engage in off-task, high-risk behaviors. Things like actively checking their mobile phone or even eating meals while the system is active.
Wait, isn't the whole point of automation meant to be reducing distraction, making things safer? Are you saying the tech designed to help is actually making people more prone to risky behavior?
In terms of that specific off-task behavior, yes, that's what the data suggests. The driver is already leaning towards distraction because the machine is handling some functions, and then you layer on top an infotainment UI that might be simultaneously fiddly and difficult to use. The result is a dramatically compounded risk. The car is implicitly telling the driver, relax, I've got this, while simultaneously requiring them to spend, say, 16 seconds inputting a navigation address via a complex screen menu. It's a dangerous combination.
So the ultimate fix here, then, isn't really about nostalgia for old cars, but about applying rigorous, modern human factors design discipline. The scientific approach to building systems around actual human capabilities and limitations.
Absolutely. For car companies moving forward, this discipline dictates some clear, measurable criteria. First, they probably need to re-implement haptic physical controls for anything used frequently. Not just the Euro NCAP red list items, but maybe common controls like simple audio functions or frequently adjusted settings, things you reach for all the time.
Okay. And for everything that must remain on the screen, the design mandate has to be single-glance actions, right?
Exactly. That means large hit targets for your fingers, persistent climate bars, minimal submenus, absolutely zero hunting for basic functions. It needs to be quick, intuitive, glanceable.
And crucially, the industry needs to move beyond just adding cool features and start proving safety more objectively.
Yes, I think so. They need to build to an objective distraction budget, if you like. Using methods like occlusion testing or eye glance tests, where they literally measure the exact milliseconds the driver spends looking away from the road for a specific task. This kind of verified, measured approach is how they avoid that looks great in the showroom but is unsafe in traffic trap we've been discussing.
Right. So the marking shift we are seeing, with giants like VW essentially conceding the point, is signaling that car interiors need to look, well, less like a giant phone and maybe a bit more like a car again. But as we continue to blend the essential task of driving with our increasingly complex digital lives, navigating, playing audio, communicating, we still face this persistent challenge, don't we?
We do, yes. The fundamental question for every car designer really moving forward is, how do we ensure that the convenience of all this one-tap technology never interferes with the most essential and frankly the oldest rule of the road, keeping your eyes squarely on it?
That structural conflict, that tension between digital aesthetics and fundamental physical safety, seems like the battlefield the industry is now forced to fight on, driven by some pretty irrefutable data. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.